Thank you, Dr. Sherwood Randall, for joining us. We are going to make a quick stage change here and bring up some additional chairs, and I want to take that opportunity to introduce our distinguished panel. They will be joining James on stage for the discussion in just a moment. I want to start with Ambassador Kåre Aas, Norwegian Ambassador to the United States. Renee Jones-Boss, Secretary General for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Matt Bunn, Professor of Practice, John F. Kennedy School of Government at the Harvard University. Representative Jeff Fortenberry, member of the U.S. House of Representatives. The Honorable Jane Harman, former member, U.S. House of Representatives, and president of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. The Honorable Sam Nunn, and William Tobey, senior fellow, the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard University. As soon as these folks join us on stage, I will turn it over to you, James.
Great. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. And I want to get to you now. The very presence of Senator Nunn and his former compatriot, Senator Lugar, and how important they were in this effort is all the evidence a lot of us need that Congress is critical in this, in keeping alive this idea that we have to get under control the materials we're talking about, but also the whole non-proliferation architecture writ large. Talk for a second of how you see Congress's role in this and how you see Congress being able to keep the momentum behind this when it's got an inbox that none of us would relish in terms of crises, in terms of budget impasses. Give us your sort of take on Congress's role.
Glad to. First of all, let me thank National Journal for hosting this very important discussion, and I think it's relevant to the answer to your question. But as you were talking, Professor Bunn, I was thinking, how can you stop a determined nun? Have you ever tried to do that? I agree with you completely in terms of heightening security culture, but that's a huge challenge. Congress is torn in 1,000 directions. We have limited staff, limited resources, limited time. Before I came here this morning, I spoke to a group of Nebraskans. There were about 100 Nebraskans there. Every week for the last 70 years, any Nebraskan who's in town can come to the Nebraska breakfast, and the entire delegation is there. So it's a good time to interact with our constituents, to share stories, to poke fun at the rest of the delegation. It's a nice ongoing event. This morning there were farmers there. There were representatives from the disabled community, business persons, and groups of school children. And when you look out at them, it causes you to reflect that my most important job is to keep them safe. And yet in Congress, it just seems like on questions about the future of civilization, existential questions, we just don't have the time. We hope that the spectrum of efforts, whether that's both in the public sector, the administration, the military, the intelligence sectors, NGOs, other countries' goodwill, is doing enough to provide a safe and secure environment. But as we all know, there are tremendous holes here, and the intensity of the question should compel all of Congress to actually heighten not only awareness, but to do the long-term critical thinking. Congress has changed very dramatically since Senator Nunn was there, even since Congresswoman Harman has been there, because of the volatility and drama of politics, the money pouring into the system, the federalizing of so many issues that it distracts from long-term thinking and planning in a bipartisan manner in a way that should transcend any political divide. That is a very huge challenge.
But talk about the Congressional Nuclear Security Working Group, because it sounds to me like an effort to keep this issue alive in the minds of congressmen and women. But give me your sort of agenda for that group.
Glad to. This was my attempt to try to make a contribution to solving this problem, along with Congressman Adam Schiff from California. We've been trying to work in a bipartisan way to think about the full, again, spectrum, the multidimensional complex layers that go into nuclear security, and actually have some venue that is formalized in Congress to bring experts in to heighten awareness, to be positioned when budgetary discussions come around as to how we're going to set priorities. This is a fairly new movement. I need help. Many of you are interested in helping with this. But I think the bigger question is we tend to look at this through an academic lens and a policy planning lens. The other thing that we need is a movement of people. I'll give you an example. I voted on a bill regarding electricity the other day, and I was swiftly rebuked by a group of constituents back home who did not like the construct of that bill, who've organized themselves around the idea of a carbon tax in response to climate change. But there is no one who will respond by email or in thoughtful policy engagement with me or any other member of Congress about this forthcoming summit, about this panel, because again, it's so hard for us to get our mind around that, and it's not seemingly an immediate crisis, although the burden of this weighs heavily on all of us.
Well, I commend your efforts, certainly. Mr. Ambassador, I see a hand right here.
Hello, I'm Samira Daniels, Ramsey Decisions. My question is to Professor Bunn. Nice to see you. I see one of the major challenges as a conflict or a dichotomy between this Cold War rhetoric, which emanates from some circles in the United States, and then a somewhat more techno-diplomatic and I would say more mature, rhetoric coming out of some others, and I'm wondering if maybe PON and Kennedy School can focus on nuclear diplomacy and to start thinking about it in a much more evidentiary and mature way, and I'm wondering if you see merit, because I think Sam Nunn, Senator Nunn, when I first became part of this discussion, did emphasize that the conflicts have to be resolved to some degree for there to be some progress on the issue of nuclear security, and I was wondering if any of you could speak to that, and you particularly, Professor Bunn.
So I think it's a good question, and I think it's very important at moments like this, when we have this crisis in U.S.-Russian relations, to remember that while we need to protect our interests in that crisis, we also need to protect and work on the common interests that Russia and the United States have together. And certainly Russia and the United States have a common interest in preventing nuclear terrorism. They have a common interest in controlling nuclear weapons and ensuring security for nuclear material. And the reality is that when it was the Soviet Union and we were locked in a global struggle, we were able to cooperate together to build the non-proliferation regime that now exists, to put the structure of strategic nuclear arms control in place. So I have to think that we ought to be able to cooperate with Putin's Russia as well, even while we push back where we need to on things like the occupation of the Crimea. And in particular, there's, I think, a feeling in both Moscow and Washington that I think is wrong, that the work is done on nuclear security in Russia and that there's nothing left to do there anymore. It's not. There's a huge problem of sustainability. There are problems of security culture. There are still weaknesses in insider protection. And we still need to be working together. At the moment, most cooperation has been stalled for almost a year on nuclear security in Russia, and it was just on the point of sort of getting moving again with discussions back and forth when the Ukraine crisis broke out. I remain hopeful that we will be able to get that back on an even keel and really put it on if we manage to resolve the Ukraine crisis and get back to some reasonable level of tension in our relations, really put it on a new level of more equal partnership.
Could I make a disruptive comment? And that is that the National Journal gets it, this audience gets it, the mature people at the Kennedy School get it, Sam Nunn and NTI have gotten it for longer than all the rest of us. But there is not a mature or even informed conversation in most of the press, which is much more interested in whether Justin Bieber gets arrested for drunk driving at age 18 than a serious conversation about surveillance, let alone this subject. So I had some experience with that recently. But I do think it's a challenge. I mean, Jeff Fortenberry talks about meeting his Nebraskans early in the morning, and They should know more about this, how to get this. And I've been in meetings with Sam and others at NTI to try to talk about how to jumpstart the right conversation with younger people about this existential threat. It's just not happening. And if it's not happening, the drivers that are necessary to get people to make the right, mature decisions aren't going to be there, except in academia and occasional panels at the museum.
Yeah, and I see it even with younger reporters now. This is not front and center on their agenda anymore. I see it.
That is why we've made a real effort to inform the press. We've done quite a few briefings in the run-up to the summit at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with the press to just talk them through, what is this all about, give them examples, get our experts to explain, and also have sessions about it, do sessions with also the National Forensics Institute to make it a bit more tangible. And we're going to try to continue that during and after the summit to reach a broader audience.
Will there be young